The moderators. Good evening today, everybody, and I welcome you to a very interesting session for the cases to be presented by two excellent people, Devarata and Rakesh Sarkar. So I request Kartike and Hygrid to take over and start the proceedings. Thank you.
Dr. Vanita, so welcome all to
Kartikeya.
today's meeting. Yeah. So we have Dr. Debrat from Kolkata and Dr. Rakesh from my center in Vedanta, Gurgaon to present cases today. And I think without wasting any time, I invite Dr. Debrat to present his case.
Dr. Sarkar will be presenting first. I think Devrata wanted to go second. So if it is okay, Kartike with
Yeah,
you?
that's fine. Yeah. So we have Dr. Rakesh Sarkar who will be presenting his first case.
The speaker can kindly unmute himself.
Am I visible, madam?
You can
Yes,
see
yes,
your
of course.
screen and we can hear you.
So, good evening, everybody, all my esteemed teachers and friends and colleagues. So, at the outset, I would like to thank IHRS for giving me the opportunity to present in front of all of you. So, I'll be presenting two cases. The first case I am going to present on a patient who develops heart failure and persistent AFib in a post-pacemaker status. So, how to manage? So, this is a 65-year-old lady who underwent pacemaker implantation 9 years ago in view of complete AV block. She is otherwise diabetic, hypertensive, and having normal coronary artery. Presently, she came with dyspnea of NYHA class 3 and pedal edema. Her ejection fraction was seen to be 35% with global LV hypokinesia and septal jerky movement, although her EF was normal at the time of initial implantation. Device interrogation showed the pacemaker reached elective replacement indicated voltage. So it was otherwise good parameters in terms of the lead parameters. And ventricular pacing was 99% with LRL of 60 in PVIR mode. Her creatinine was found to be 1.9 mg per dl and NT-proBNP little on the higher side. So when we looked at the ECG of this patient, we saw the QRS is brought in view of in background of persistent AFib which is going on, and the rate was around 65 in PVIR mode. But when we actually lowered down the rate and we tried to see the intrinsic rate, it appeared to be around 45. It was 45 per minute with narrow QRS. And we could easily see the memory sign here also, which led us to believe that what could have been the reason for development of persistent AFib as well as LV dysfunction. So we went ahead with some options for further management, as because the device already reached the ERI. So we thought about definitely changing the pulse generator, but one option would have been the decreasing of the lower rate limit just to allow the intrinsic rhythm and to get away from the paced rhythm, just to avoid broad QRS and RV paced dysynchrony. It could have been upgraded to biventricular pacing. Ablation of atrial fibrillation could have been a chance, but definitely her EF came down below 35% and LA was quite dilated, and she was attempted for cardioversion previously twice but could not hold the rhythm. So we went ahead with the last option, conduction system pacing, because it was dual chamber pacing and the company was supposed to give the device free of cost. So without going for much expense and better longevity what the patient herself was willing for, we just gave a try for conduction system pacing. So we went ahead for mapping the His bundle area. So as we can see, the His filter, which is the bipolar, and His unfiltered is the unipolar. So it is showing good distal his potential before the QRS onset. And when we went ahead with pacing at the his bundle area with that signal, we saw that reasonably good QRS, although it is sort of non-selective his bundle pacing, but reasonably good QRS, which was almost similar to the intrinsic QRS morphology. We actually came down with the output, and at 1.8 volt at 0.6 millisecond, we found that we could be able to achieve selective his bundle capture, which is shown by this pointer. But subsequently, next output, when we are coming down, it actually lost, and we are little hesitant to accept that particular threshold. So we thought that anyway we are going to get a dual chamber pacemaker, and why should not try with the left bundle pacing. So we just tried to go for left bundle area pacing. As you can see here, the right side of the panel is showing the intrinsic QRS, and the left side of the panel is showing the left bundle paced, the paced rhythm. And fairly narrow QRS with, again, memory sign, which may not be true representation or reflection of left bundle pacing, but some hump also we can see here in V1, and 2-3 ABAP is showing discordance along with narrow QRS, although it is not as narrow as the intrinsic QRS. And in the non-paced rhythm, we can see very good injury current also. So what we achieved with that left bundle area pacing, we saw that reasonably narrow 116 millisecond of QRS duration with LVAT of 80 millisecond, and there is, from my understanding, some isoelectric line in between the stem to onset of QRS. So fluoroscopy is looking like that in RAO view, RAO 30 degree, which is showing the upper lead, his bundle lead. Here we used the Medtronic Select Secure 3830 lead with the help of C315 sheave, and the lower one is the left bundle lead, which is placed little distal and below, maybe on the line of joining the his bundle and the RB apex. And in the LAO view, it was showing completely, not completely, but inside the septum, if you compare with the vertebral landmark. So final device setting kept at DDD mode with LRL of 16 dpm. Atrial pacing was found to be 100%, where V pacing was 0. So we actually kept VSP off here with the AV delay of 150 and 180, and final atrial, which is actually the his bundle lead and ventricular lead, which is placed in the left bundle area, showing reasonably good threshold. But we wanted to achieve narrower QRS, so hence we paced from atrium. One thing I should like to highlight here, we could have made it BVI also, just to avoid the oversensing issue with that, undersensing issue with the ROF sensing of 2.5 millivolt, which is a common problem with his bundle pacing. So the final ECG, which looked like in his bundle pacing, keeping the AI mode at 1 volt at 0.0 millisecond. Subsequently, the next day when we actually see in unipolar mode, the threshold came down reasonably okay. It became 1 volt at 0.5 millisecond, which is showing completely narrow QRS without any delta pattern or slurring before the QRS onset, and just with little higher amplitude or output, it was showing just non-selective his bundle capture. But we are okay with that his bundle pacing also. And with that VBI pacemaking option, when we saw the ECG, it was showing definitely left bundle pacing, although the R prime was not that large, but reasonably okay QRS and reasonably left bundle pacing what we could be achieved. So it was at 3.5 volt at 0.5 millisecond in unipolar, and when we came down to 0.5 volt at 0.5 millisecond, it was showing the similar and identical morphology. So it actually suggests it is a left bundle pacing rather than LV septal pacing alone. So this is one illustration which can give us the impression where the area which can be targeted during the conduction system pacing. I'm not wasting time just with the illustration, but there are few advantage of looking at the criteria for selective his bundle, selective lead bundle, all these things. If you have two leads, one his bundle and one lead bundle. So if we pace the lead bundle lead, we can see if it is a non-selective capture, the his2 QRS may be actually not that much narrow. But if it is a selective lead bundle capture, the his2 in the second electrode, the his2 onset of QRS may be actually little more, because it will be selective his bundle capture. So it will not go across the myocardium, and this is one of the way to prove the selective versus non-selective lead bundle pacing, which I found in a study and in a special case. So otherwise, there are a lot of other criteria to prove it, whether it is lead bundle or selective lead bundle or non-selective lead bundle. So what is the better option in view of this persistent AFib and LV dysfunction and this sort of patients? We tried to look at different studies, and they are coming with a lot of promise with the his bundle pacing over traditional BiV pacing in view of AV junction ablation in AFib or AFib with slow ventricular rate, particularly with intrinsic narrow QRS. And this is also feasible in pacing-induced cardiomyopathy with lead bundle pacemaker also, lead bundle pacing also. So one interesting thing which we could be able to find, there was some head-to-head study, not a large population, it's 14 versus 10 patient cohort, which have been actually compared between his bundle and lead bundle, and they showed reasonably good threshold, particularly in lead bundle pacing area, where the actually pacing threshold gone little higher in his bundle lead. So the follow-up period was roughly 10.5 months, and they found this particular observation. And to our surprise, when we actually look at another study, it's done recently, I mean, it's published recently, 1st August PACE, they have published this study comparing the synchronization pattern of lead bundle and his bundle in a patient of atrial fibrillation. It's an intra-patient control study, so it's very interesting what they actually tried to propose. If we do his bundle and lead bundle both in the same patient and we cross over, actually, they tried to show that in terms of the LV myocardial strain measurement, there is no significant difference. But definitely there is a chance of higher QRS after lead bundle pacing, which is definitely narrower in case of his bundle pacing. And in terms of other parameters of synchrony, like lead bundle pacing had less interventricular synchrony. That means there may be some bit higher chance of intraventricular mechanical dysynchrony, which have been observed by some strain echo here. Although they cannot conclude, I mean, they could not conclude what is the better option. So the key findings from our case study are as follows. Like his bundle and lead bundle both could be performed safely in a patient with infranodal block in advanced AV block or CHB with atrial fibrillation who develop pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy, probably which we are actually thinking in our scenario. His bundle pacing probably achieves the best QRS morphology as we see in our patient also, as far as the intrinsic rhythm is concerned. An acceptable threshold from either his or lead bundle pacing during the median 6-month follow-up, we could see. Favorable echocardiographic indices like improvement in EF, reduction of LV size, and improvement in NYHA class all can be achieved by either of the pacing methods. And we actually preferred his bundle here because of the narrower QRS. And actually, after 6 months, patient improved a lot. We saw that patient uh, is doing reasonably okay compared to the 6 months previous situation. So, shall I go to my second presentation, sir? Or?
I think we should have some comments about your
Have some
presentation.
discussion.
Everybody will forget what you had presented. So,
Yeah, so before Highgrave, you moderate this case, I would just add to this that we extracted both the leads manually before we started implantation.
that was my first
implanting
question.
Yeah.
That was my first question. Where are the other leads in
Yeah,
the
so we
fluoroscopy?
extracted these first and then went ahead and did the his bundle and then the left bundle.
Why was extraction thought about? I mean, why did you do extraction?
So as a policy, what we have seen that if we leave abundant leads, it actually creates a problem in the long term. And we always discuss that in such scenario where the leads are non-infected, we attempt it, and if we get them out easily, we take them out. But if it is quite difficult or challenging, then we leave them and secure in the pocket. But I fortunately last 1 year or so we have done a lot of lead extractions, both infected and non-infected, and I think we have been successful most of the time. I don't actually remember in last 1.5 years any lead which we have not extracted, and the requirement of special tools also has been actually quite minimal, except snaring in few cases where it was an infected lead and cut by another operator elsewhere, and then patient came with pocket sinuses and all those things, and we had to snare them from below.
Okay, so you're using with you mean to say you are able to do it without using any rotation or laser or anything?
Fortunately, till now, yes.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
But we have all the tools available with us at standby, so if needed, we can use those just to cut down the cost, because those are very costly actually.
Yeah, that was actually the first question, because in the fluoroscopy when it's showing, I could not see the dual chamber, the two leads. So that was the first question: what happened to the two leads, whether it was extracted? Anyway, the most important point in this case is it's actually very well demonstrated case of a patient who developed cardiomyopathy following pacemaker, dual chamber pacemaker. But the issue, which is one of the issues which needs to be focused, is also the AF part of it. The pacing, whether CRT or AV junctional ablation or left bundle or his bundle, has been discussed, no doubt. But the important issue here is also the atrial fibrillation. So was the cardioversion done initially to convert to sinus before all this was done?
Yes, sir. Actually, she was attempted for twice cardioversion, but she could not actually hold the rhythm in sinus for a longer time. And the issue was that when the dual chamber was implanted, she was in actually sinus rhythm with CHB. But AP became persistent, and LS size also became like 5.2 centimeter. So we thought it may not be AV related, although the AV synchrony is not there, definitely. We could not get the AV synchrony at any of the cost. But we thought it may be in the other way.
No, but how has, in the cardiomyopathy has two important aspects in this patient. One is the wide QRS causing worsening of, ventricular function, agreed, that you addressed by physiological pacing. But the issue of AFib still remains. So how would you say that this would have been better than one of the questions in the chat box also?
I'll answer that. See, this patient had been in AF for more than 5-6 years now, and had previous 2 attempts at cardioversion, which actually failed, or AF resumed after a few minutes of cardioversion. And she had been tried with Amedron and beta blockers, but it never worked. And she was never actually symptomatic for AF in view of AV block. So, and with a large LA size, and we never thought that AF maintaining sinus rhythm and achieving that will be a possible feasible option in this patient.
Correct.
One can consider that, but we know the results of maintaining sinus are actually pretty bad. Especially in this kind of a subset, we are not going to achieve much. We have to keep her on anticoagulation. The only thing we would have achieved is AV synchrony, and but with the very low chances of maintaining AF, we never tried to address that. She was already on oral anticoagulation, and we did the procedure actually on oral anticoagulation.
Now, how would this be superior to junctional ablation and
Actually,
dual ablation?
yeah, she was in CHB. So basically, only the junctional escape was there in the background rhythm. It was around 44, 46, the junctional escape rhythm, which was quite narrow. So we didn't have the problem with that AV with fast conduction across the AV node with some irregularity, which could have been potentially the cause for tachycardiomyopathy in this kind of scenario. Definitely, the AV synchrony is not there. That is acceptable. We can accept that part, but definitely the chance of fast rate, conduction of the atrial fibrillation across the AV node was not there. And the other possibility which we thought about, definitely sometimes there may be some underlying myocarditis or kind of sarcoid which can result in LV dysfunction in pacing post-pacemaker patient. That is also possible, but as because the patient actually responded well after the conduction system pacing, we believe that it is actually the pacing-induced cardiomyopathy, because otherwise she didn't have any VT or other things just to look for the PET and other things.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. So this is
Address some of the
Velu.
questions in chat box. Yeah, some of the questions in chat box, Karthikeya, would you like to address them?
Yes. So why both his bundle and left bundle branch pacing was done in this patient? Why not left bundle pacing alone? Dr. Vadivellu has asked that. So I'll answer that we discussed everything about the procedure with the patient. See, the issue was that patient already had a pacing for life dual chamber pacemaker. She had no issues with the cost. We in fact actually told her that if we don't achieve good conduction system pacing, we'll go do and CRT also. But since we got a good pacing threshold with his bundle, but we know that there are in certain patients, there are chances for increase in pacing threshold in the his bundle region. And the main issue with the patient was that she never wanted multiple procedures, and she wanted a device which will last longer. That was our only wish. And so we thought, let's put both the leads. Cost was never an issue. The device was free. So we put both his bundle lead. And we thought that if the threshold rises over time, we always have an option to pace from the left bundle lead in the VVIR mode. And that will give her a longer pace, device longevity. Another was left bundle area potential seen during pacing as you have used his bundle lead also? I don't think we saw any potential, but the paced QRS looked good with good acceptable LVAT and narrow QRS. So, but I don't think we saw actually true potential to say. Third is AV nodal ablation should have been done in this patient to give maximum benefit for the patient. Patient was already in complete heart block, persistent with 100% ventricular pacing. So there was no need of a AV nodal ablation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand.
Can AF cause cardiomyopathy if there is associated CHP and cannot conduct down with irregularity or high rate? Definitely, I think it can definitely result in not only ventricular dysfunction, but even atrial cardiomyopathy, and that can also contribute to congestive heart failure, even if the ventricular function is preserved. So we know that there are multiple issues related to AF-related ventricular heart failure. And one of those could be, in fact, atrial dilatation and rise in atrial pressures, back pressures, and heart failure symptoms despite preserved ventricular function. So this can be still a cause in this R patient even after conduction system pacing. But fortunately, the EF improved to 50% and she is totally asymptomatic now. Why not ablate AF also? That I have already discussed. with improvement in LV dysfunction, can't we expect sinus to come back in future? Then patient will pace in VVI mode. See, patient when the LV function was normal was still in AF. So she has been in AF for the last 6-7 years. At that time, the ejection fraction was actually normal. So it is unlikely that the AF is related to ventricular pacing alone. And it may be the underlying disease itself, which resulted in complete heart block also. So we didn't expect that. And since patient has been doing well with VVI pacing for so many years, I don't feel that she will, even if sinus returns, she will have a problem with that. But let's see. What was the fluoro time and total procedure time? I don't remember that. Rakesh, do you remember how much was the fluoro time?
It was 1.5 hour like that, roughly 90 minutes.
Yeah, it was actually quite fast, and with extraction, 2 lead extractions and placement of his bundle and left bundle, I think that was acceptable time.
Yes, yes.
You covered all the questions, Karthika. Let's move on to the next case. What do you say?
Yes. So next is Dr. Rakesh.
Yes, I'm sharing my screen. So the second case I'm going to present on a device case. It's a ICD shock in a young lady. So this is 19-year-old lady who presented at a year with sudden collapse during some playful activity. So in her past medical history, she had been taking anti-epileptic for years, maybe 10 years, in view of recurrent undiagnosed LOC, which was primarily diagnosed as seizure. 1 year back, when she was in a leisure vacation trip, there was a history of cardiac arrest, which was categorically in the morning time after arousal from the sleep. And it was found to be VF, which was requiring DC shock for defibrillation. Subsequently, she underwent subcutaneous ICD implantation at that particular center that was abroad, some Singapore hospital. And in the family history, her father was diagnosed to have HCM. It was not HOCM. Otherwise, there was no significant history in the first degree relative or in the siblings. So when we tried to look at the baseline ECG, as ECG showed to be sinus bradycardia comparing her age, although she was on beta blocker and other rate limiting drugs for this arrhythmia issue, and little low voltage QRS, but otherwise we could not see any other obvious finding. And QTC here also showing reasonably good value, 336 by Badgett's maneuver, which is mentioned here. But another ECG when we actually tried to look at, it was on a little faster sinus rate. And here we actually saw in V5 leads and also in lead 2, there was some impression of TOA, which is almost spilling over half of the RR interval of the interval. And then we definitely went with the idea that it may be a situation which we are dealing with long QT syndrome. So we actually advised for genetic analysis, which showed heterozygous mutation of variant of uncertain significance with probable damaging effect, which was previously also discussed sometimes back by Dr. Amia. And it was actually indicating some mutation in the KCNH2 gene, which is potentially responsible gene for LQT2. So otherwise, the investigation was unremarkable, starting from echocardiography, EEG, routine blood and biochemistry reports. But when we looked at the ICD device itself, the device actually showed that she received 5 episodes of shocks delivered from the subacute ICD. So we looked at the EGM. It's actually the surface ECG which is acquired from the device, which also gave the episode's details. By and large, what we can be able to see, I'm just trying to describe. So it's a broad QRS tachycardia which is going on, and device has annotated the rhythm, which is coming with S initially in the upper panel, but suddenly, which is not actually going to be proportionate with the previous rhythm. In between the RR or in between the QRS, suddenly the device has started annotating something as TTT, which we thought it can be something related to double counting. But whether it was T-wave oversensing or R-wave double counting, we are not sure. But at this point, we saw that the device has probably gone into the shockable zone, and device has delivered the shock, which is the fast shock, and it didn't actually did much effect on the ongoing rhythm. The rhythm is still going on, as we can see here. After the shock also, the rhythm actually persists. The second shock also delivered with the same probably the discrimination or the definition, because apart from the tip of the QRS or the with the peak of R, there is some other annotation which is coming in between the RR, which is probably a part of the double counting. But in the third shock, which is actually making some nuisance here, which we probably guessed that the rhythm completely became polymorphic, bizarre, and very low amplitude. It can be a result of post-shock alteration of the morphology of the QRS from the surface ECG acquisition, or it may be polymorphic VT or true VA. And device has actually could not probably pick up the bit-to-bit QRS here. So some undersensing is going on. And in the fourth shock, actually, probably the rhythm has come back to the sinus, which we actually thought of. And lastly, the shock when received as a fifth shock, it also actually discriminated as a shockable rhythm. But anyway, the rhythm actually got little changed, but in terms of the baseline rate, which was going at the rate of 160 initially, it actually slowed down a bit, but there is definitely some alteration of the QRS morphology. So what we are actually dealing with, I'm just going step by step. So before I go just the full ACCG report and the device annotation, I mean device interpretation and the setting, I want to highlight the shock zone was kept at 240 zone, and conditional zone, which is basically a monitoring zone, was kept 200 BPM. Post-shock pacing was on, and smart pass algorithm was on. This is, I will come later, which is one of the algorithm in subcutaneous ICD just to avoid the TOE oversensing. And in this given scenario, what is the nature of the recurrent shock, whether it is appropriate or inappropriate, and how to troubleshoot, that we are going to discuss probably. So basically, in contrast to the transvenous ICD, there is some basic difference in terms of interpretation of the EGM and the electrogram. That is, transvenous ICD actually uses near field and far field both, which is not possible in subcutaneous ICD. Only far field EGM is actually sensed in subcutaneous ICD, which undergoes some processing or kind of refinement. And after any sensed event, actually it undergoes some sensing certification through some specialized ways, which can actually exclude EMI, myopotential, TOE oversensing, and R-wave double counting. So after certification of the rhythm, actually it detects the rhythm as shockable or non-shockable depending on some other features looking at the rate. So this is called rhythm classification, which is the final step of the rhythm discrimination. So programmer actually shows two options for shock. Actually, multiple therapy option is not available in subcutaneous ICD compared to the transvenous ICD. We can keep it as dual zone, but the upper zone will be the shockable zone, and lower conditional zones we can apply the discriminators to just differentiate between the SVT and VT, but this will lack the potential shock therapy or the high voltage therapy. So this conditional zone, I want to touch upon some points. They actually try to look at the rhythm based on some analysis. So there are three types of discrimination modalities available with the conditional zone. One is static morphology analysis. Another is dynamic morphology analysis, which actually analyze the ECG bit to bit or EGM bit to bit, which is not otherwise possible in any of the certification zone or the previous steps which I described. So only the dynamic morphology analysis is possible in case of conditional zone, which actually can enhance the threshold, decrease the threshold of giving the shock, particularly if it is polymorphic VT or so, because otherwise the subcutaneous ICD doesn't look at bit-to-bit EGM. It actually looks at the average morphology and some clusters of the EGMs. And the last option is the QRS with analysis, which also tries to analyze the QRS template. But all the potential templates are acquired by either of the three options or vectors. So the vectors is very much important, and it is important before the implantation itself, because the vectors are acquired from two electrodes using CAN also as three apex of a triangle, and basically primary, secondary, and alternate three vectors are used alternatively, which will give best result whenever in terms of the QRS and TOA morphology. So basic idea is that we should have good QRS and T ratio just to avoid the TOA oversensing, which probably could have been the case in our scenario. But here also another thing, it can be done manually, or it device itself can sense which is the best vector, and accordingly it can actually go for selection of that particular vector. So before coming to our case, which is going on, that I showed that SmartPass algorithm, which was also kept in our case, is also a robust algorithm which actually can avoid this TOA oversensing, because we use very wide bandwidth for sensing the EGM in subcutaneous ICD. There is always a possibility of uptaking the T wave also in the fashion of R wave or double counting. So in this scenario, the SmartPass algorithm is supposed to help incrementally by raising the fencing threshold, fencing or kind of high pass threshold at a little higher value from 3 to 9 Hz, which will actually obviate the TOA oversensing. So in this case also the SmartPass algorithm was kept on, but still the patient unfortunately received shock. So what can be the potential reason for getting shock in this particular patient? Although we just looked at everything was almost reasonably okay. So we tried to look at the holder done in one of the setting, which actually showed us a very interesting thing. So we saw some PSCs are coming which give rise to some kind of RBV aberrancy or kind of bundle branch aberrancy. And then we actually presume that it can be a sinus tachycardia itself, which resulted in sinus tachycardia with bundle branch aberrancy, which actually resulted in some changes in the repolarization parameters or TOF, which have been double counted. So when we interrogated actually regarding the screening test, they told the initial screening test before the implantation was done. But the problem is that always remains to just avoid this scenario, which is always exercise induced or some activity induced bundle branch aberrancy or change of QRS morphology, which often give rise to oversensing phenomena and TOA oversensing and inappropriate shock. That requires special regard, and that could have been done in particular case. So in final part of the troubleshooting or device setting, we made bit of changes in the sensing configuration. We kept the sensing configuration from primary to alternate that I already showed, because we tried to go for TMT and activity induced QRS changes, and probably we found that alternate alternate sensing configuration is supposed to be better. So we kept that particular template as the ventricular arrhythmia, for comparison of the ventricular arrhythmia QRS morphology. And we just enhanced beta blocker doses. And one interesting thing, she was actually not on beta blocker prior, because the physician who was treating her, otherwise, probably he thought that it is a type 3 LQT, and subsequently she was on mexiletine and other treatments rather than the higher dose of beta blocker. So it actually enhanced the dose of beta blocker. So in conclusion, I want to mention that long QT syndrome diagnosis is always a challenge, and it remains an ambiguity, because a lot of times people think that it's something related to seizure activity or neurological phenomena. Genetic screening definitely helps a lot to come to the diagnosis, but as in our case, definitely it is not a conclusive, again, of uncertain variants, and challenge regarding the proper medical therapy, because she was, although diagnosed as long QT, she was on mexiletine rather than beta blocker, which was to be on. And there is always a debate between rationale of implantation of the ICD in LQT, but in our case, as she was a case of aborted SCD requiring defib and resuscitation, so definitely ICD implantation was right. But the controversy always remains whether subcutaneous ICD or transcutaneous ICD, because although the lead related issues are less in subcutaneous ICD, but it's not actually free of hazard, because oversensing might be a potential problem. And with that, I like to conclude here. So I want to thank Dr. Karthikeya Bhargava sir and my colleague Dr. Rakesh Dudhwa. So I conclude.
It's a very nice demonstration of the two major problems that we are concerned about subcutaneous ICD, the T wave oversensing as well as the underdetection of the VF, which was shown here. Now, there are two important things. One thing is when you use the alternate sensing configuration, how did you acquire the template? By doing a TMT or by any other means?
Yes, sir. So I actually spoke, because I don't have personal experience much. So I spoke to the people who does it on and off. So they told me there are two ways. The basic screening tool, just to get the cutaneous EGM, just to have an idea what is going to be the best before the implantation. If it is showing very high amplitude of R or T, then probably 10% of people like that who cannot pass through that screening. And after implantation, the device itself actually selects the best one, the best factors. But it can be manually selected looking at the templates of the ECG or EGM. And the last option is that you can do some additional screening tests also, like you can do some TMT and some activity which will, which can unmask the underlying bundle branch aberrancy, which can happen in this kind of scenario.
But the undersensing of VF is a matter of concern. So did you do a DFT after that, or is it not?
Well, I'll answer that. So before I answer that, actually, there are a lot of issues in this case. And the reason for presenting is that to bring out all those issues in patients with long QT syndrome. In fact, if you see, this patient was on anti-epileptic drugs for 10 years. So that is one reason. Every patient with epilepsy or seizure in childhood should undergo an ECG. So that's one mistake that happened with this patient. Secondly, despite having multiple syncopal episodes, the only time she required a defibrillation was when she was in Singapore, and VF was actually documented. And had she been in India, she may not have survived, because out of hospitals, cardiac arrest, would have been very difficult to manage there. And since she had an arrest, she was given a subcutaneous ICD there, but her history was very classical, that she actually used to have syncope while she was in bed, but she was not asleep. So the history was that when she was awake from sleep, just after sleep, with any loud noise like a call bell, she would get a syncope. And this, while this may have been some language issues, that they miscommunicated this to be syncope during sleep and started her on mexiletine and were not given beta blocker. So when she came to me, she was only on mexiletine and anti-epileptic drugs. So the thing that I did was got the mexiletine off and started her on propranolol, and gradually took her off anti-epileptic drugs. Did a family screening. We found that her father, who was absolutely asymptomatic, was found to have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and her ECG was actually identical to her ECG. And her two siblings had both normal ECG and echo and were totally asymptomatic. And then when genetic analysis of this girl came out to be positive, the family screening for the same mutation of the entire family showed that the siblings were all negative for the same mutation, but her father, who also has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, has the same mutation. So genetic analysis was helpful in this case, and then confirmed that it is long QT2. And after she actually came to me with shocks during playing while running, and both of all those shocks were actually inappropriate. And after starting propranolol, she has never had any syncope or any episode on device interrogation. And I asked her to do a TMT or a VF testing, but she was totally reluctant. In fact, she is obese, and it is actually a challenge for her to lose weight because she is afraid of doing exercise, because all her shocks were received when she was totally awake and was running. And that's the reason she didn't want to get a TMT done. But I was also okay with that, because with the Holter, I could understand what the problem was. So all those challenges in diagnosis, management, had a long QT been diagnosed in her case earlier, I would feel that ICD would not have even been required in this patient. She would have very well have been managed very well only on beta blockers, which she is doing for last one year or so. She has not received any episode or any syncope.
Yeah. The decision you will again encounter when she comes for a device change at the ERI.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That is very nice demonstration actually, which is of a seen by all of us. Subcutaneous problems with subcutaneous ICD. Very informative. Thank you. You have any other? Shall we go to the next case?
Yeah. Yeah, Haigirev and Karthikeyan, Dr. Debarata has to be invited, please.
Yeah. So Dr. Debabrata from Kolkata will present his case, which is, I think, an electrophysiology case. Dr. Debabrata, please.
Yeah. See, Vanita, that is a problem with ad hoc moderators.
I understand that, and thank you so much. Thank you, Haigirev. Thank you, Karthikeyan, for doing the job so well.
No, apologies.
So, ma'am, shall I start?
Yeah, please, Debabrata, please.
So thank you. Thank you, IHRS and madam, for giving me this opportunity. My case, I have two cases. If I'll present one, and if time permits, I'll go to the next one with the permission of the moderators. So my cases are relatively simple, not as exotic as Rakesh's cases. So, but a little unique in terms of this patient required a permanent pacemaker after a left free wall pathway ablation. So I'll start with this patient who is a 55. Ma'am, am I audible properly?
Yeah, you're very much audible.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. This patient is a 55-year-old lady who had episodes of paroxysmal palpitation earlier, but this time she got admitted at an outside hospital, and there was almost like an incessant tachycardia. It was a RBPB morphology tachycardia, but it was responding to adenosine every time. She was very, very symptomatic. Every time there was a beginning of the initiation of the tachycardia, she starts vomiting, repeated episodes of vomiting and severe fatigue during the tachycardia, which gets relieved once it was treated with adenosine and patient comes to sinus rhythm. But just remaining just for few minutes in sinus rhythm, she again goes back to the same tachycardia with some PAC or PVC. They even have given IV amiodarone, but unfortunately, she continued to have intermittent prolonged episodes of tachycardia, which you can see on the screen. It looks like a RBPB morphology tachycardia. And this is the, sorry for the quality of the ECG. I do not have the sinus rhythm of baseline ECG, but I'll show you the EP tracing ECG. So the patient was brought back from the outside hospital because of this incessant or intermittently severe episodes of tachycardia. Although she received amiodarone, I took her for a EP study and if needed, ablation. She also had a couple of old ECGs which had intermittent more pre-excitation, which looked like there is a left lateral pathway. I placed all the catheters and the VA was, I'm just skipping some of the basic EP tracings because the focus will be more after the ablation. So the VA was eccentric, looking like a left lateral pathway. And during a V pacing, we induced the same clinical tachycardia which she had outside. The rate was, although not very high, it was around 150, 160 beats per minute. And this was the cardiac. Whenever I nowadays have a left lateral pathway, I generally take two coronary sinus catheters to almost cover up the whole of the coronary sinus and if possible to bracket the pathway. Just for mentioning that this HRA catheter is in the HIS and this is a positive HV tachycardia with eccentric atrial activation. And possibly there is a bracketing somewhere, this CS7, 8, 9, 10. I will show you the fluoro image, how the CS catheter was placed. And all maneuvers were done, which was proved to be a AVRT via left lateral accessory pathway and intermittent pre-excitation was there. Although at the baseline, which I have showed, that there was a only subtle pre-excitation in baseline in the beginning of the case. Now, I thought of, I proved that with his synchronous BBC, the tachycardia was also terminated and which proved that the pathway was participating in the tachycardia. Planned for a mapping in a retrograde route via transaortic with a small curve catheter. As soon as I entered the left ventricle with a small curve catheter, I noticed that there is the pre-excitation has become florid, which was very subtle in the beginning of the case. Now the pre-excitation is quite florid here. And this ablation catheter is now in the left ventricle. So I just looked at the VA conduction, which was again eccentric as before. And atrial pacing shows that there is the pre-excitation is almost same as in the sinus rhythm. Like this is the sinus rhythm. When I pace the coronary sinus, the pre-excitation was almost similar. And I had a doubt that possibly I have bumped the AV node while entering the left ventricle with the retrograde transaortic route with the small curve catheter. Now, more so to support this possible hypothesis, what I found that this patient who had a very easily inducible tachycardia, almost incessant, now the tachycardia has become non-inducible. So I thought obviously, or maybe I have bumped the AV, mechanical bumped the AV node. I tried to pace from various atrial sites. So this is a pacing from lateral aspect of the coronary sinus, and this is a pacing from the HRA, and both of them gave almost a similar QRS morphology. So the patient was throughout, now the patient is almost throughout with maximum pre-excitation. So in the back of my mind, I thought the patient would have developed AV nodal bumping. I waited for 10-15 minutes, but it remained same as before. Now, I discussed with the patient relatives that possibly there is a mechanical injury to the AV node, the normal conduction system. And if I ablate the pathway, there might be requirement of a temporary pacemaker for some time being, but generally they recover in few minutes or few hours. And unfortunately, although I entered the LV retrogradely, it was unsuccessful to ablate the pathway via retrograde route. Finally, I have to take a transeptal puncture, and then the ablation was uneventful. Not, I would say, uneventful. The ablation was successful. This is during sinus rhythm. When I applied energy, there was a AV dissociation, complete AV dissociation, and possibly infra is AV dissociation. But somehow I was mentally prepared for this, and the patient relatives are also has been told about the same, because the patient had a severe symptoms during this admission. They agreed for it. Okay, if the patient still requires some temporary pacemaker, we are okay with it. Now, as soon as there was a AV block, I paused for a while, and I saw that again the AV conduction has come back. And then I again rethought whether I should go ahead and ablate. And again, I discussed with the patient relatives. I saw that the VA conduction is still through the pathway. Tachycardia is still not inducible. And I ablated the pathway during V pacing. We can see that the VA conduction is now got abolished. I consolidated the lesions. And after that, what I find is the patient is in complete AV block. Again, this was also expected, or somehow I was mentally prepared. And this is a little slower speed just to show that there is a infra is AV block which is going on. I expected that once I put a temporary, then after some time it will recover. But I waited for 48 hours. The complete heart block persisted. Patient was TPI dependent at 60, although she had an underlying rhythm of around 35 to 40. Finally, after 48 hours, I implanted a pacemaker, because I thought maybe waiting more, even if the conduction system recovers, I was not very confident sending her home with this kind of ECG which I have seen. I was even thinking that the patient was possibly having intermittent complete heart block, but which was masked or prevented. The symptoms are prevented by the presence of the accessory pathway, antegrade accessory pathway. Now, after 7 days, the patient came back. She was still in ventricular pace A since V pace ECG, although the VIP was on and the patient was ventricular pacing dependent. Now, I retrospectively looked at the ECGs that where anything I missed or anything went wrong. So when I looked at the ECG, this was the pre-ablation sinus rhythm ECG. It looked like there is a RBBB, underlying RBBB, along with a subtle pre-excitation. But when there is a orthotomic reentrant tachycardia, that is fully nodal conduction, I could see there is a RBBB, along with possibly there is a left posterior fascicular block. So the patient already had a bifascicular block, and not only bifascicular, it is a LPFB. So maybe I have just scratched or bumped the left anterior fascicle, and the patient went into complete heart block, which unfortunately persisted. So my take-home message from this case that we have to be careful even for the left lateral accessory pathway ablation when there is a RBBB along with there is a bifascicular block, especially if there is a LPFB in baseline. Bumping can be very prolonged if there is a LAFB bump, because it is a slender structure. I don't know how much of this is actually amiodarone effect, because she received amiodarone loading outside during that incessant tachycardia. And this is again a conclusion what I feel, that in if the patient has a bifascicular block and we are trying to ablate a left-sided pathway, maybe better to go antegrade transeptal route rather than a retrograde route. So the story doesn't end here. Just to complete the case, the patient comes to me after 4 weeks, and now this is the ECG. This is the baseline ECG. The RBBB is not there. The LPFB is not there, and looks like a pure normal sinus rhythm ECG. And this is the ECG with magnet. Now I don't know where those RBBB, LPFB has gone. What possibilities I thought that it may be a equal delay in the right and left bundle, or maybe the node or the conduction has recovered from the amiodarone effect. I really don't know what is the cause for this, and possibly I would more of kind of seeking advice from all my seniors and colleagues. Thank you so much. I don't think the RBBB was rate related, because as I have shown that even with the rate of 75-80, there was a right bundle branch block.
So very nice case, Debrat. So couple of points before I take on the questions. One is, what was the HV interval during the tachycardia? And secondly, when you saw that patient in follow-up with the normal ECG, did you try to pace the atria at faster rate to see whether you have bundle branch aberrancy or not?
No, sir. The second question is I haven't tried this. I saw her in the peripheral center, and I do not have the access to the programmer. And about your first question, HV, what I remember is normal. I just will go back to the tachycardia ECG. I exactly do not remember. Possibly I would have measured and kept it for you, but this is the HV here.
One has to measure it, but anyhow, so I think when we do go retrogradely with an ablation catheter, bumping of the left bundle branch is quite common, but it is usually transient and recovers within 10-15 minutes. And that could have been a possibility in this case. And if the disease was pre-existent, this is probably the reason. Maybe it took longer time to recover. And whether it is left anterior fascicular bumping or bumping of the left bundle branch actually doesn't matter, because both can result in complete heart block. But it's good that you discussed with the relatives and then went ahead. It otherwise would have been a problem to explain.
True, sir.
Yeah.
But
I
to
agree.
be honest, I told them that it never has happened that it doesn't come back. So you will be sure. I was actually wrong. In the counseling was a different way. I told them that you don't need to have permanent pacemaker.
Yeah, Devabrata, that is there are two important comments that I would like to make, which may be used to anyone. One thing is a pre-excitation with an underlying complete heart block. I would say rare, but it is not uncommon in a career, in our careers. But so that is as a protocol. What is recommended is any pre-excitation, however easy it may seem, before ablating, it is very important to give extras and demonstrate underlying AV nodal conduction, blocking the pathway. So to demonstrate that that underlying CHV is not there, because in your case it's okay, you had so much suspicion. Otherwise, what will happen is you just go in easy pathway, you ablate it, result in a complete heart block. It will be thought as a procedure-related complication rather than an underlying complete heart block. So it's always important to give an extra and demonstrate an underlying AV nodal conduction. That is one thing. Second thing is bumping. Even chat box is a question, and you also mentioned bumping. But in this case, as Karthikeya, I agree with him. Bumping is very unlikely, because if you do bumping is possible, but it would be not there 4 days, 5 days. The way that you have shown that it has a complete heart block. The only way is either in a procedure. A complete heart block will be caused is either there is an underlying complete heart block or that we produce during ablation. It's very unlikely that a catheter bumping will last for more than few hours at the most. So that is an unlikely situation in this case. So nevertheless, a great case to demonstrate this for many reasons.
So just one comment that as soon as I entered the LV with the catheter, the pre-excitation from fluoride, which was otherwise very subtle. So I think to start the complete heart block, it was I'm pretty sure it was bumping. Maybe the persistent is because of her underlying disease. I feel so.
Correct. As Karthikeya said, it actually, underlying thing, it was precipitated by the bumping and it persisted. So there is no way bumping alone would cause a persistent block. You cannot produce a AV block by bumping alone.
And can amiodarone effect be responsible for everything, whatever I faced? You don't think so? Means the ECG now is almost normal after 4 weeks. So I was little surprised to see this ECG.
Yeah. Your conduction, your conduction abnormality and the widening QRS, these are possibly amiodarone because they have been reversible after you stopped amiodarone. That is a definite possibility in this case. Yeah, Karthikeya, I want to give some concluding remarks. We're already at 9:15.
So I think the bumping was definitely there. The reason why it persisted, it is difficult to say. And I think bumping can have a prolonged effect at times. it is just conjectural. We can't say that it should recover in so much time or so. So most likely it is bumping, and patient had a normal ECG at baseline. And since we now see it is a normal ECG, the only thing is if you pace the atria now and see if there is a right bundle branch during a higher paced rate, atrial pace rate, then it will confirm that he had aberrancy before the procedure. Otherwise, it is very difficult to prove now what is or you can check the HV interval now. That's the only way, but no need of that now. But very interesting case.
So, Deva has actually more cases to go. But what I was thinking, would you want to continue, or should we have Deva at the next session again, with all the
I think that would be a better idea, because
Yeah.
today I think the number of
got late today.
audience
Actually,
also
we
is
got
less.
late today. Otherwise, we would have covered another case from Deva.
Yeah.
So, Devarata, can you present 2 cases next time?
Sure,
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
ma'am.
I think that would be
Definitely.
better. Haigreve, what do you say?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karthikeya. Thank you, Haigreve. Special thanks to both of you. And Rakesh and Devarata, fantastic job done. Very interesting cases. All 3 of them were really good clinical scenarios. And all the very best, and see you next time. Good night.
Thank you, Monica.
Bye.
समझ में नहीं है ये कौन सी मिट्टी के बने हुए तेरे पोते चार एक नंबर तो पढ़ाई में भी एक नंबर हमेशा 90%, 95%। उन्होंने पे कॉलेज से बोल रहा है। हेलो, क्या बोल रहा हूँ? अच्छी बात, आज से ये प्रिंसिपल साहब परसों तो आज से बाहर थे, आज मुझे कॉलेज मिला, वो भी पहली बार। अरे बुद्धू, इस बार पहले